and welcome to the Full Scottish here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride, and we're joined today by two fabulous guests. First of all, by Andrew Wilson from All Under One Banner. Andrew, how are you doing today?
Kenny, good afternoon. I'm great, thanks. How are you?
I'm not bad at all. And on the other side, we have Sam Paton from the Save Loch Lomond campaign. Sam, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Kenny. How's things with you?
I'm all right. We are going to come back a wee bit to your health in a minute, but we're going to start today just with a quick update of the coronavirus statistics for today. These, of course, come from yesterday afternoon. Today's statistics will be announced in a couple of hours. So yesterday there were 27 new confirmed cases of COVID-19. There were 0 new reported deaths in Scotland of people who have tested positive though. There have been a total of 341,551 people in Scotland who have been tested. Of those, 323,004 were confirmed negative, 18,547 tests were positive. There were 270 people in hospital last night, and 2 of those were in intensive care. And the number of patients who have tested positive who have died in Scotland still stands at 2,491. So looking at these numbers, first of all, Sam, I did want to ask, you had your test for coronavirus the other day, and I understand it did come back negative. So how are you feeling now?
I'm absolutely feeling good. It's obviously it was just a cold, but we got our test results for about 10 to 8 the following morning, which was really quick for me and the wee fella. And it just came through saying it was negative, and it had a kind of list of guidelines and things like that. So I was well impressed at how quickly it came back. And it kind of just took a bit of stress off knowing that it wasn't COVID and it was more than likely just a cold. So you just treat it accordingly. So it was a day on the couch with paracetamol and just resting and plenty of fluids the way you would do with any other cold. And apart from just the odd cough, and that's it, I'm absolutely fine.
Great. Well, yeah, you do sound a lot better than you were the other night. So, Andrew, as just coming to you now, this 27 new cases, now we understand a chunk of these were from football clubs who, of course, have been back training together, preparing for games to start again in earnest. And I understand that some of those, I think it was at St Mirren, were thought to be connected to the outbreak at the Sittle call centre in Lanarkshire. Seeing these numbers rising, I mean, they're not into huge numbers yet, but we have seen a rise in cases over the last week or so. Does that worry you very much?
Well, Kenny, I think the numbers that we're seeing are not a surprise. I think we're perhaps now into the new normal until there's a vaccine or until the virus is completely removed. We're going to see rises and falls in the numbers of infections. And I think the one thing that perhaps means that I'm less concerned, or I'm not as concerned as I might otherwise be, is that it would appear that the track and trace programme and the testing programme is working relatively well, and that we are able to pursue infections and pursue those connected to the infections quickly. And if we're able to act promptly and apply the resources that we have, then I think it shows that the system is working, and it shows that we may maybe have the means to, if not remove, but to control the spread of the virus at the moment.
Now, I did talk to Sam about this a wee bit on the show the other night. How do you feel about this, the situation we're in now, where businesses are starting to open up? We understand that call centre didn't have very good procedures in place for keeping people distanced. We didn't, and we also heard there wasn't much of a risk assessment done. And now we're coming to the end of coming to the shrinkage of the furlough scheme. Are you concerned that we are going to see businesses more and more opening up without doing the proper work to make workers safe?
I think there is always that risk. the different employers will operate in different ways. From my own experience, talking to a few businesses, I can see that those businesses are taking their responsibilities extremely seriously. I think it's well recognised in occupational health and HR departments in larger corporations that the risk of the employer being found liable if they have not followed the guidelines and have not done everything that is reasonably possible in order to make the workplace safe. So, from an employer's perspective, I think there are definitely legal risks associated with unlocking, and so I think we're going to see a combination of things. We're going to see a continued reticence on the part of the workforce to be returning to places of work, especially if they are concerned that the places of work have not been as well set up as they might have been to protect the workers. And I think we're going to see businesses continue to, the majority of businesses continue to focus very hard on preparing for reopening. And so, whilst I think it is an inevitability that the workplaces being open will make it easier for the virus to spread, I think employers generally are taking their obligations very seriously.
And Sam, we've seen a big stooshy this week in England as masks became compulsory in shops. How do you think Scotland is coping from what you've seen when you've been out and about? Or do you think Scotland is doing better on that front? Do you think people are still wearing their masks consistently and looking after themselves properly?
Stooshy, it's a fantastic word, isn't it? It just explains it perfectly what's been going on down there. We have to get used to it, and the thing is we're coping quite well. You see quite a lot of people, even people I've noticed in the shops, people that are elderly, young kids and things wearing them because they feel safer. They want to wear them. Even though people with asthma who are insisting on wearing them as well. And then you've got the other side of the coin where people are scared about wearing them. I think it's the unknown and being uncomfortable. I wear a facial snood. And I generally carry spears in my bag, sealed, brand new sealed ones. And even last week, I handed a couple out to people who had went out, first time had went out, didn't really understand the rules and get caught out, and it was mostly people with teenagers. So the thing is with the snoods, they're a bit more fashionable, they don't look as horrible and as geeky as wearing a facial mask. So, but yeah, we are a lot better, but I was laughing at my wee one, as you know, he's very opinionated and like many kids in Scotland, has got very strong political views, and he had been listening to all this about England wearing the facial coverings, and he says, "Why do you think these are against their human rights?" He says, "Surely it's against human rights to knowingly go out and possibly infect someone. Wearing a facial mask to protect people is not against human rights." So I thought, oh crikey, he kind of gets this in a way, you know. And my lad, as you know, Penny, is very much about human rights and children's rights. And he doesn't even see. He just thinks that they're mad and crazy with the kind of stooshy that's been created about wearing facial coverings down in England. He just thinks that. He doesn't get it. It's quite hilarious watching an 8-year-old watching this and listening to his opinions. And I think, crikey, what are they doing? They're creating a fuss over nothing. You know, we wear things over our face all the time. We just don't realise we do it. You know, when it's cold and it's wet and windy, we zip up our jackets and cover our faces. And, you know, and so, yeah, it is. It's just a big mountain over a molehill, I would say, regarding facial coverings.
Well, before we go any further, I would just remind you, you can see on the screen now, you can join the conversation here on the Full Scottish. If you're following us on Twitter at Broadcast Scot, use the hashtag Full Scottish, and we will be bringing up some of your thoughts on the screen throughout the show. But speaking of the mentality of 8-year-olds, Boris Johnson was in Scotland this week. Boris Johnson visited Orkney and then came down to the mainland for a bit. As avoiding the crowds, which obviously is a good thing in the context of coronavirus. We wouldn't want him going spreading the virus. say, shaking hands with hospital patients, as he has done before. But Boris Johnson was up here supposedly to save the Union. This is, we're told that the London establishment is in a panic about Scotland, having seen new polls showing a rise in support for independence and majority support for independence. So, Andrew, I think I'll come to you first on this one. Is Boris Johnson a help to the cause of unionism in Scotland when he makes these kinds of appearances?
No, Kenny, I don't think he is. I do wonder what possibly could be a help for the cause of unionism in Scotland now. It is now a minority pastime, and I think, is showing all signs of becoming even more a minority pastime. I think it's unquestionable that Johnson is one of the greatest recruiters for the independence cause for Scotland. And the manner of his visit on Thursday made that clear. I was personally very impressed to see how quickly those who support independence mobilised, both in Orkney and in Morayshire. As I understand it, the detail of the Prime Minister's itinerary was embargoed, so activists in those two parts of the country had to react very quickly on Wednesday night and Thursday morning, but they were there to greet the Prime Minister, I think, with people stretched from Stromness to Kirkwall on Orkney, and people at Kinloss Barracks at the gate, such that in order to avoid them, the Prime Minister exited through a crash gate at the side of the airfield and couldn't even use the main gate of the barracks. So I think it was encouraging to see the response of local people. I think it also gave another useful example of the way in which Johnson campaigns and operates. I was struck to see Douglas Ross, the Morayshire Tory MP, saying how pleased he was and how delighted that the staff at Baxter's factory at Fochabers that Johnson and the Cabinet visited, how Ross was telling us how pleased he was that the response that Johnson had received from the workforce at the factory. Now, as I understand it from other members of the workforce of the factory, they weren't there. They'd all been sent home. So we see the cheerleaders for Boris continuing to lie and dissemble. We see Boris continuing to hide from the people, and we see the absence of any positive case for the Union being writ large in our own country again. So I'm encouraged by that level of campaigning for independence from the Prime Minister.
And Sam, we heard Boris Johnson on this trip talking about the sheer might of the Union and how that was all that had saved Scotland from coronavirus. But it's clearly in contradiction of what we've seen, because smaller countries, almost without exception, have done far better than larger countries. There are some large countries that have done well. Germany obviously springs to mind there. But New Zealand, Taiwan, the Faroe Islands, these are the countries that have, done really well on this. Is the sheer might of the Union, does that kind of bombastic, aggressive, we are big and strong, do you think that still cuts through with the Scottish public?
Oh, Kenny, what you try to do to me on a Sunday at 12 o'clock in the day, and crikey. I just want to break into some giggles over this, honestly. It's just so laughable. He's such a big scaredy cat to even think, that he was showing the might of the British Empire coming to Scotland, but hiding and back doors and side doors and scurrying about like a wee mouse. Do you know what I mean? It's just, it just really shows leadership, doesn't it? It really shows the might of the. Sorry, I really can't take this serious, Kenny. It's just, honestly, the whole thing from start to finish. I mean, if he was wanting to show leadership skills in any shape or form or show unity, surely to goodness, the first thing he should have done is do a proper tour of Scotland and go to the areas and go to the normal people and speak to them And instead of hiding away, he's just honestly, I mean, as Andrew, he's helping the independence cause so well. He's our best recruit ever. And it just goes to show how lack of what's the word? I can't even think. I'm too busy trying not to laugh here. He just doesn't show any respect to the Scots at all. Whatever, on a serious note, he's got no respect for us whatsoever, and that just showed that. And it was just very clear. He was hiding and scurrying about. Going to Baxter's where there was no workforce, there was nobody there, and then they're pretending that people were cheering him and everything else, and it's like, really? Okay, and people are buying that. That's amazing that people actually buy that rubbish. So yeah, it's just it's a joke. It's basically is, and they're not doing themselves any favours. All they're doing is they're showing their true colours, really.
Now, Andrew, a lot of people have said that Boris Johnson is this great recruiting sergeant for the independence movement. He's not, necessarily the most popular person in Scotland, and never really has been. But if you were to be a Tory advisor, what would your suggestion be about how he could perhaps engage with Scotland in a more effective way?
Well, there's two things, Kenny. Firstly, the phrase "sheer might" must be the Spoonerism of the weekend. But apart from that, I think as we can see, the cause of the Tories in Scotland and Unionism more generally, but the cause of the Tories in particular in Scotland is pretty much on life support at the moment. And if the polling that we're seeing is accurate and continues up until May next year, I think the Tory party in Scotland will absolutely be on life support. So I think there are a number of things that are motifs of the Tory cause in Scotland at the moment, and I think those may be some clues as to why the popularity of the party is continuing to slide across Scotland. I think we see a preponderance of self-important, bombastic white men, middle-aged men, middle-class men, who delight in going around telling everybody else what to do and aren't really great at listening. I think the engagement from senior Tories in Scotland is very poor indeed. And it may in fact be why we're seeing people like Professor Tompkins saying that he's going to stand down the next election. I think he can see the way that the wind is blowing. I think he can see the tides of history, how they are flowing, and he doesn't want to be caught on the wrong side of history, would be my assessment of the situation. So I think for the Tories in particular, to stop putting middle-aged, middle-class, self-entitled car salesmen on the front line, perhaps putting a more sensible face on the party, a more honest face on the party, would be a step in the right direction. I may not necessarily be Ruth Davidson's biggest fan, but she was an effective operator and she put a different face on the Tory party. Of course, she notoriously fell out with the Tory party when Johnson came to power, and that possibly indicates again the root of the problem. She couldn't work with Johnson, who is perhaps the most entitled, most upper middle class, most ill-qualified white man in political power in the UK at the moment. So I think some serious rebranding is required. And of course, one other argument I think in favour of conservatism in Scotland is for the Tories to bite the bullet. It's for the Conservative Party to abandon its unionist history and to register in a way that's never been done before. So perhaps register as a political party in Scotland and perhaps be a party that operates in Scotland rather than the propaganda wing of a colonial power. I think those would be a number of things that might help their cause.
Well, that does kind of tie into something else I wanted to talk about, because this week we have seen a lot of people talking about the unionist fight back. Obviously, these changes in the polls have got a lot of people concerned about what the future is for Scotland. And we've seen a number of interesting developments. Now, first of all, I wanted to mention Layla Moran, who's one of the candidates to be the new leader of the Lib Dems, making a plea for the emotional case for the union. And Sam, what do you make of this idea that they shouldn't be making the kind of financial case, the practical case, you don't have a currency, you won't be allowed into the EU, all the arguments that we got last time about how difficult being an independent country would be, and instead to somehow make the emotional case for the union, presumably the fabled positive case for the union. Is there do you think an emotional case for the union to be made? Is there some way that people in Scotland could be reminded how much they love the UK?
I think they're clutching at straws now, and that's basically what's happened, because all the other arguments have been failed, and obviously they have, Scotland is more capable, regarding currency, fiscal powers and everything else, and we keep proving that we can do this. We don't have all the answers, and yes, we will make mistakes when we are independent. You know what I mean? But however, we do have the knowledge and the know-how. We just need to be able to do it. So now what they're doing is going into this emotional card, which is basically manipulation. If you can't get people to do something one way, you then change tactics and go another way. And so what they're doing is using this emotional card, trying to play on people's heartstrings. But unfortunately, it's too little too late. Or fortunately, depending what side of the coin you're on, because what's happened is people in Scotland have quite openly seen with their own eyes how Scotland is treated as a second-class colony in this arrangement, and how we're repeatedly told we're not allowed, or we're to be quiet, or all the kind of comments that Boris Johnson and his cronies and everybody makes in Westminster. That's been aired. We see that in Scotland. So yes, Layla McCann trying to go down this route of being the emotional card. It's clutching at straws. It's not going to work, because the thing is, what she doesn't understand, and what a lot of them don't understand, is how we have been treated living up here. Everybody in Scotland living up here, how we're treated, and how we've got to fight to just basically get a lifestyle which is comfortable, and how we're always fighting to protect the most vulnerable in our society. We generally, as a culture, generally stand by everybody and have a kind of ethos of leave no one behind, whereas the British Empire is a bit different from that. This again, it's just an empty, feeble, emotional card trick from somebody who doesn't actually understand what it's like living in Scotland and being up here. And if they want to make a case for the union, I think it's too little too late. They'd be as well, just as Andrew said, with the Conservatives, even with the Lib Dems, they'd be as well breaking away and just stopping this unionist rhetoric. There's been too much damage done now.
And Andrew, another development we've seen this week was George Galloway launching his Alliance for Unity. This is the kind of flip side of the discussion that's been going on in the independence movement for a while about a list party to kind of unify the vote. You mentioned older white men kind of telling people how to think. Is George Galloway and this list party the way to go, do you think?
I think as unionism continues to shrink and continues to lose support in Scotland, we'll see a number of people who have made careers from the union attempt to shore up support and attempt to protect their income streams. I'm pretty confident that Mr. Galloway nowadays is really only interested in Mr. Galloway. I really don't believe that he's particularly bothered about anything else. I think this this list party or this list organisation that he's been setting up. I think the behaviour that I've seen so far from that group probably gives the lie where they're going to go with this. An organisation which uses an RAF roundel military insignia as its logo, an organisation which has already started its activities by blocking widely journalists and others who are asking sensible and coherent questions, attempting to understand what it is that this group wants to do. So an aggressive, a passive-aggressive behaviour on Twitter and an overtly aggressive branding and look and feel tells us that this also feels like the kind of end of the story for unionism. These I would like to think are the indications of the death throes of the cause.
Mm. And Sam, Tony Blair spoke out this week as well, saying that Boris Johnson wasn't the man to save the union, and he did have a lot of praise for Ruth Davidson. Ruth Davidson this week said that one of the problems that had been made was not sticking the boot in after the 2014 referendum. Now, I think a lot of people in Scotland will say that, you know, English votes for English laws within minutes of the result being announced in 2014, followed by the Scotland Act, where Scottish votes in the House of Commons were completely ignored, were to a large extent putting the boot in. Do you think Ruth Davidson has got it right? Do you think that maybe the independence cause could have been snuffed out if they'd, in the words of Ian Davidson, bayoneted the wounded after the 2014 vote?
Unbelievable. What are you trying to do to me this morning, Ken? Honestly, you know, the thing is, that is just, on one hand it's a joke and you can laugh at it, and, it makes quite a good comedy, really. But on the other hand, there is a kind of serious side of the wording and the wording that they choose to use, which is quite threatening, which worries me. As much as we can laugh and joke and everything else about it, the kind of wording they're saying about sticking the boot in and all these kind of things, that's inciting violence, that's inciting hatred, as far as I'm concerned, and is a no-go area. And, for politicians to be speaking like that is despicable. They need to be held to task for that, because the world we live in, and it's world in general, when politicians and leaders or supposedly leaders are using that kind of wording, there is vulnerable people in society who will take that quite literally. And that's what kickstarts violence and hatred. So as far as I'm concerned, any politician, any so-called leader, or anyone within a level of responsibility using, these kind of words should be held to task. Regarding, after the referendum, I mean, the thing is, it wouldn't have mattered. The way they behaved, the way they acted after the referendum was enough to swing a certain amount of no votes to yes. And I think if they're going along the lines of they should have done this and they should have done that, in hindsight, again, it shows that they are losing the battle and they are clutching at straws again. The end of the day, the union is over. There's even people down in England are saying they don't want Scotland to be part of the union. You've got people in Wales turn around and saying they're talking about now going independent and everything else. The union is over, and you normally find when a relationship is over, that you will get certain parties starting to clutch at straws. And I keep repeating myself here because that's what they're doing. They're clutching at straws, and what they're doing is they're not helping their cause. They're helping our cause, because people, what they're doing is they're getting desperate, and they're literally telling us what to do. They're threatening to take away our devolved powers and things like that. to try and keep us down, and all it's going to do is keep reigniting the flame of independence.
Well, the other big news this week was, of course, the release of the ISC's Russia report. This was an investigation by the Intelligence Committee into Russian involvement in British democracy. And there were a number of elements came out of it. But the thing I want to talk about first is this question of disinformation in British politics. And one of the things that really struck me was that on Monday, before the report was released, The Telegraph had a headline talking about interference in the 2014 referendum by Russia. And the report itself said there wasn't, or didn't say that there was interference in the referendum. The only reference to Scotland was about a couple of articles written after the referendum suggesting that Russia had tried to cast doubt on the result, trying to stir up concerns about whether the process had been secure. Tories, including Murdo Fraser especially, made a big noise about this. The Sturgeon must investigate interference in the referendum. I think probably relying on the fact that most people won't have read the report themselves. And Andrew, is the biggest problem with disinformation in Scotland, do you think, the way that the press in this country operates?
Well, I think, Kenny, that's certainly a significant part of the problem. The Telegraph story on Monday was the very definition of a dead cat thrown on the table to distract people from what the real story was, and the fact that it then prompted bless his cotton socks Murdo to then start demanding that the First Minister exercise rights which are reserved in London. It's investigating threats to the Constitution and security matters are reserved. So it shows that that to me suggests that it clearly was a dead cat because nobody had thought about it. It was just whatever could be thrown on the table as a distraction. Now, in terms of distraction and in terms of the use of the press in the UK and Scotland in particular, where again the political part, the majority of the political parties are not registered in Scotland. And the majority of the news outlets are not registered in Scotland either. And so they're operating on behalf of a different country. They're not operating on behalf of the people of Scotland. And they don't, we're often hear tabloid editors defending their trade by saying that, they merely reflect the people that they're selling their papers to. That clearly cannot be the case. If those tabloids and other newspapers are registered and operate in another country, they simply cannot reflect the wishes and the lives of people in Scotland. So I think that they operate largely nowadays as disinformation machines is a sad reflection on the state of journalism. It's an indication, perhaps, of the way in which journalism has had to change in the age of the internet, and as a result, the amount of actual journalism going on is reduced, and instead, or papers like the Telegraph in particular, really just become vehicles for reprinting Tory party press releases verbatim and carrying messages from Downing Street sources, usually Mr. Cummings, I presume, and so that to me means that the downward spiral of the print media in the British Isles, I'll put it in those terms, is going to continue because people are not stupid. They can see that the level of disinformation, they can see the level of partiality especially in the print media, and people are less and less persuaded by it, which is why the number of newspapers being sold has gone through the floor. Excuse me. People can sense and can see the disinformation for themselves, and that's why they're voting with their feet.
Mm. And Sam, the Herald journalist David Leask had an article talking about how Scotland wasn't able to have a grown-up conversation about Russia's influence on our democracy. And we know Russia is a hostile power. We know that it does have some effect on how things are done in Britain, not least the amount of money flowing through London and flowing through the Tory party. But I felt we did have a very good discussion here on Broadcasting Scotland on Friday. I don't know if you watched it, but is there, do you think, just a lack of awareness of where to find some different kinds of analysis? Some of the new media that are trying very hard to provide a more Scotland centric and a more balanced, perhaps, sense of what's going on in Britain than we get from the newspapers.
I didn't see the show on Friday because I was with family. But however, just going by the kind of snippets and things I've seen myself on social media and the media, so this is completely my point of view here. The thing is, governments around the world, it doesn't matter whether it's UK government or Russia or whoever, rely on propaganda to keep the masses under control. And there was a certain amount where journalism now, and probably in the past, has been manipulated by the governments to put out this propaganda. And I pretty much believe, I'm watching what I'm seeing here, that this happened after the 2014 referendum in Scotland, because it would serve purposes, whether it was Russia, UK, America, or various other countries around the world. Generally, in Scotland, one of the biggest problems is we have a very small Scottish-based news outlets and journalism, and that's our biggest problem. So getting well-balanced views in Scotland is very, very difficult, and people need to be quite savvy with the internet and things like that to find them. And general people, and I don't mean this as in a horrible way, so please don't take it away. In general, people are lazy in the sense that, they see a newspaper, they pick it up because it's convenience. And that's what I mean, it's about convenience. And that's the same with the TV and things like that. So that's why when it comes to newspapers and news outlets, it's convenience. So to go and hunt out these other news outlets, it takes a bit of effort. And we all lead busy lifestyles, we've got running out the families, work and things. So unless somebody actually turns around and says to you, there is a Scottish-based media outlet, watch that. A lot of people don't know. Even like somebody Broadcasting Scotland, it's all about word of mouth and things like that. So it's very difficult to get a balanced view in Scotland, and a lot of UK knows that, and various other countries around the world use that, America and Russia, and they will use that to their advantage. Now the thing is I know, like some of the Russia report talking about the money and the influences down through Westminster, and that's what you've got to kind of think about is, well, if there's money going through Westminster through various means and things like that, and there's connections down there, what effect does that have on Scotland? Because they are ruling or have a say and pushing or lobbying certain things at the heart of the UK government and Westminster, and which will obviously have a knock-on effect on Scotland, on Wales, and on Northern Ireland, and and how we trade with the world and how we work with the world. And this is one of the things we need to ask, is how that affects Scotland. I'm no political expert, I'm not an economist, I'm not an analyst or anything, I'm just seeing this from my point of view. If there's money going through the heart of the UK government, then you've come to what effects that's having. And as putting out these articles after the 2014 referendum, was that a deflection for some reason? Was that a way to deflect the Scots? If it was, what was the purpose? Was it to cause more of a split? If it was, why? Or was that them testing the water to see, what kind of influence the UK government had over Scotland? Because at the end of the day, we've got so many resources in Scotland that England doesn't have, and it's about controlling resources and assets, and that's the bottom line. But that's my point of view. Whether I'm right or wrong, I don't know. I can't answer that. I'm not an expert.
Yeah. If you didn't see the show on Friday, we had Roger Mullen, former MP, who of course did a lot of work while he was an MP on what's called the London laundromat, the money laundering, and Londongrad, this idea of great Russian influence in the city. And we also had Dr. Alan Flowers, who's an expert on Belarus, Ukraine, Georgia. And we talked a lot about Russia's influence on its neighbours as much as on our own country. Strongly recommend watching it. I do think it was a very balanced and very interesting look at some of the issues coming out of the Russia report, and certainly probably a lot more balanced than you're going to get from The Telegraph, and certainly more balanced than you might get from a number of other sources as well. Well, we move to another country where we are seeing some disturbing authoritarian trends, and that's the United States of America. There have been ongoing protests in Portland, in Oregon, for some time now. They started around the Black Lives Matter movement, and there has been some difficulties in policing that. Now, Donald Trump, against the will of the Portland mayor and the governor of Oregon, has sent in Border Patrol agents to help police it. Now, Border Patrol, you might wonder why that's able to operate in this context. It's because the Border Patrol are entitled under federal law to operate within 100 miles of any border. And because Portland is right near the coast, it counts as that. So these Border Patrol agents have been there in combat fatigues, with automatic rifles, no name badges, and have been effectively disappearing people. They have been dragging people off the streets, throwing them into unmarked vehicles, without identifying themselves, without reading them their rights. And technically this is legal under US law. The Border Patrol does have the authority, but it does seem that on some issues, like, for example, not identifying themselves and not reading people their rights, and then taking people away in unarmed vehicles, they are overstepping their authority, and it certainly has a very, very dark implication about how Donald Trump intends to proceed in the United States. Andrew, I don't know how much you've been watching some of this, but it's really frightening when you see some of this footage of people who are apparently just standing near these armed militia, being dragged away, kicking and screaming, without ever being told what their alleged crime is.
That's right, Kenny. I certainly have seen stories this morning reporting violence in Colorado as well, in Aurora, which is outside Denver. And that reporting that I saw this morning also was talking about militia, talking in particular about both militia acting in support of, or saying that they were acting in support of the Black Lives Matter movement, but also white militia who were arming and assembling to counter protest, and that's in a state like Colorado, that's a real concern. But returning to the points that you're making with regard to the operation of federal agents or those appointed as federal agents in Oregon, there are a number of significant issues related to the activities that we've seen reported in the press over the last few days. We know that Trump has a strong authoritarian streak as a nasty little narcissist any opportunity to dress up in military fatigues or have others dress up in military fatigues is absolutely in the middle of his very dysfunctional psyche. We know, for example, how keen he was to organise some form of gigantic military parade in the middle of Washington, and how unhappy the Department of Defence was with his plans, regarding his plans as being fundamentally un-American. That he has sought to deploy heavily armed, heavily militarized federal agents in Oregon as some kind of show of his alleged force, I think again indicates just how weak he actually is. One of the concerns with the use of agencies such as the border forces and others is that in the same way as the American military operates, those agencies rely heavily on contractors. The men who we've seen standing in camouflage and helmets and carrying very heavy automatic weapons may not even be directly employed by the federal government. They may very well be contractors. And as we know from US operations in the Middle East, military operations in the Middle East, once contractors become involved on the ground, then the risk of compliance and the risk of problems, the risk of law breaking becomes significantly higher. The activities of businesses like Blackstone during the Iraq conflicts is well reported, and the issues that arose there. So it's a concern in terms of the way in which the federal government is operating. It's a concern for the rights and freedoms of people citizens in the United States, many of whom can see the significant difficulty and the significant problems that this style of action brings. I think it's been widely reported a former US sailor, member of the US Navy, who confronted some of these agents, pointing out to them that whether or not they were contracted, they were obliged to comply with the law. And that meant that if they were given an order that was illegal, they are obliged not to follow that order. He, needless to say, received short shrift from those with whom he was trying to discuss. I don't think he was lifted from the streets and thrown into the back of a van, but we've certainly seen, for example, video of a lady who was protesting harmlessly but enthusiastically, but stepped probably a few feet too close to these heavily armed camouflaged thugs who promptly beat her up and threw her in a van. So that kind of conduct will be widely reported and people can see it. And I think in terms of Trump attempting to use this as a means of demonstrating his strength or his virility, it's going to have diametrically the opposite effect.
Yeah, it's a really disturbing images, as you say. A lot of this stuff you can't see on social media if you care to go and look. It's extremely disturbing and something that we should all be aware of. In the richest, most powerful country in the world, people should not be getting disappeared the way we see in countries like Russia. It's just not okay. It's a story I'm sure that we will come back to in the coming days and weeks. But just finally, I wanted to get back to talking a little bit about coronavirus. And we have seen in the last day, we've seen quarantine reimposed on Spain, much to the chagrin of Grant Shapps, the Transport Secretary, who is on holiday in Spain as we speak. He is now going to have to quarantine for 14 days on the way back. So, Sam, Spain was one of the countries that Scotland didn't want to have an open door with initially when the British government did say that was okay. Scotland then did open up that quarantine, or drop the quarantine rather, for Spain, and is now being attacked by the likes of Murdo Fraser for jumping too soon and letting people come back from Spain without quarantine when case numbers were rising. Do you think we moved too soon on Spain, and how much do you think it was down to pressure from the British government, pressure to kind of conform because of the difficulties for Scotland of trying to manage its own borders when it doesn't have control over its own borders.
Yeah, definitely, Kenny. I mean, the thing is, this is the problem, isn't it? We don't have control over our own borders. But yeah, when it comes to the in Spain, it's just ironic that Grant Schnaps is over there when the quarantine rules have come in. But no, the thing is you know, the British government or the UK government is very much they're too busy trying to get everything back to normality. They keep using this phrase, get back to normality and things, and it's dangerous because we're in a different way of life now. And they were just too quick to open up this corridor to Spain and, letting, people going on holiday and things like that. I mean, the infection rate in England is still pretty high. I mean, we're 100 times better up here in Scotland, but they're still pretty high. At the end of the day, I was actually quite surprised when they opened up the corridor to Spain. That was one of the countries I was surprised that they did, especially when people from Scotland and England and we've all seen the pictures of people going over there already and not complying to even the Spanish. Sorry, getting my countries muddled up here. The Spanish rules, in terms of social distancing and facial mask coverings and things like that. Because people think when they're on holiday, the rules don't apply to them, and I think we need to get the message across very clearly that when you're on holiday, you need to still stick to, the normal COVID-19 restrictions and practices. Just because you're on holiday doesn't mean to say that COVID has disappeared. At the end of the day, the putting the quarantine restrictions back in was not a surprise. It was just done fairly quickly, but then again, they've got to do it fairly quickly because there's no point turning around and saying, yes, giving it 48 hours or a week down the line, but I was actually surprised that they actually kind of took the quarantine away. And Grant Schnaps, after his wee comment saying he wouldn't be going on holiday, and then suddenly goes on holiday to Spain and gets caught up. But the chances are, I don't think he'll be in quarantine. I just don't see him coming back and complying with the rules of quarantine for 14 days. I just, everything else that's happened with the UK government, I don't see it happening.
I saw somebody on social media commenting something like he could take his example from the Dominic Cummings affair and face a couple of days of bad headlines and then face no real consequences at all. Andrew, we've seen also this week reports from New Zealand of people walking around without masks, people gathering in fairly large groups. The world in New Zealand is almost completely back to normal because they shut their borders early and they have worked diligently to drive case numbers down to the point where it is now effectively a COVID-free country. The same has happened in the Faroes. Is there any chance, you think, that Scotland and or the UK can get to that stage?
I think, Kenny, it's going to be very difficult. The performance of the UK government from the beginning has been very poor and hasn't really shown much in the way of signs of improvement. The leadership from Westminster as well has been very poor. I wonder whether Grant Shapps will find his way back into the country using one of the many other names that he is notorious for having used when he used to sell get-rich-quick schemes before he came into politics. So I suspect he probably has a number of passports and he may use that as a way of avoiding some of the retribution. I think also we're seeing more and more examples, and there'll be very clear examples on the beaches and city towns in Spain over the summer of what the Germans, how the Germans refer to Brits now as Insulaffen, island apes. And I think Europe and the rest of the world will continue to see examples of that island ape-like behaviour from Brits who are on their holidays. And that, I think, indicates how difficult it is going to be to eradicate or let alone eliminate COVID from the British Isles. I think Scotland has some levers. I think the borders issue, I wouldn't be surprised if that comes back again. I know it became a hotspot for a while politically, usually with Murdo tweeting. I can only say in passing that I'm so delighted that he blocked me several years ago that I don't have to read his nonsense. But I think we might see a need for border control from Scotland to come back, especially if we see more outbreaks crossing the border, as we saw 2 or 3 weeks ago. And so I think there are still tools available to the First Minister and to the health authorities in Scotland to take greater steps. But it's going to be really hard because of the island apes who are largely living south of the border.
Yeah. Well, that is just about all we have time for today. So thank you very much to Andrew and to Sam for joining us today. It's not this evening. And I do apologise, Sam, for trying to make you laugh so much. And thank you at home for joining us as well. The whole point of these shows is to have an audience. So thank you very much for being with us. We know a lot of people are asking you for money just now, but unfortunately it's something we have to do. We don't have a lot of money here at Broadcasting Scotland, and it does cost us to keep putting these shows on. So if you are able to support Broadcasting Scotland, then please do go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register. Sign up there as a supporter. Your £5 a month makes a huge difference. It helps us to pay the bills, to develop our shows, and ultimately, if we can eventually get enough people supporting us, we can start paying some full-time professional journalists to help us be that balanced professional broadcaster that Scotland deserves. If you're not able to support us financially, you can still do a big job for us by spreading the word. Word of mouth is the best way for us to let people know what Broadcasting Scotland is and where we are. So do please tell your friends, your family, anyone you meet, the Dougs in the street, let them know where Broadcasting Scotland is and what we do here. We need you to help us that way. And finally, if you want to be one of those journalists, or if you'd like to do anything else here at Broadcasting Scotland, whether it's working behind the camera or in front of the camera like me, we would love to have you, especially as lockdown starts to lift. We are able to have more people working in the studio and in the office. So do please let us know if there's anything you'd like to do in the world of television broadcasting. We have lots of opportunities. We can offer training and support. We'd love to have you. So do please get in touch if you have any interest in that. And that is just about all we have time for today. So once again, thank you very much to Andrew Wilson and to Sam Paton for joining us. And Gordon will be back tomorrow at 7 with the Scotland at 7. I'll be back on Tuesday in my regular slot. So until then, have a cracking Sunday. Goodbye.